Deloitte Spotlight's Income Tax Policy Survey with CNBC-TV18.
Hello and welcome to Deloitte Spotlight's Income Tax Policy Survey with CNBC-TV18. I'm your host, Gautam Srinivasan, and today you will get an inside look at various aspects of the existing income tax policy and key expectations from future tax policy reforms. Joining me in this conversation that seeks to identify key areas of improvement and reforms necessary to enhance the effectiveness of the Indian income tax policy and, of course, support its economic growth are Gokul Chaudhri, President for Tax at Deloitte India, and Sanjeev Agarwal, Tax and Customs Leader at a leading MNC. Great to have you on the show. Gokul, let's start by headlining the survey done by Deloitte of hundreds of industry professionals. Now, the survey reveals an overwhelming 94% consensus on the need for simplifying India's Income Tax Act. So the question to you is, how can the government achieve this while maintaining a balance between simplicity and the intricacies of addressing complex tax scenarios effectively?
So, Gautam, the finance minister did pick up this right in the union budget last year, or the last budget, which took place in July, and spoke on the fact that she would like to take on this challenge. Certainly seems to have caught the pulse of the taxpayers, because when we did our survey, as you correctly mentioned, 94% of the taxpayers said we do need to see simplification of the tax law, which seem to have got overburdened and complex over a period of time. Now, in some respects, the journey started in 2015 when the then finance minister, Mr. Jaitley, laid out the framework to how he's going to weed out all the income tax holidays which were there and instead bring down the tax rate. Now, that was a very pragmatic tax reform that he sought to embark upon. Over the next 8 years, the government actually achieved on that. And I think that's laudatory, that today we have not using the Income Tax Act to provide tax holidays, but instead have got PLIs which sit outside. The important part now is, how does the government weed out some of those sections from the Income Tax Act, make it lighter, make it more understandable, more reader friendly, people can be able to interpret the provisions better, and thereon get to tax certainty. Investors, especially global investors, would want to see greater tax certainty in the tax code of India. And finally, taxpayers across the length and breadth of the country are saying one thing: make the compliance easier, the reporting easier for us. And that's where technology has to come in to be able to do this job faster, quicker, and on a more accurate basis for the taxpayer community.
All right, Sanjeev, let me come to you for the MNC perspective, taking this point of simplification forward, simplification of compliance and filing requirements. Now, of course, they remain a key ask from business. So my question to you is, what specific challenges, in your opinion, do multinationals face in navigating the existing tax framework, and what reforms would enhance ease of doing business?
So one of the key asks for reforms from the ease of doing business perspective is expedition of pending tax litigations. So the courts are, flooded with the tax matters due to several reasons. So some concrete steps on hearing and fastening the disposal of these pending disputes would be a welcome measure. We know there are more than 6 lakh number of direct tax cases are pending in the courts, whether it is Commissioner of Appeals, ITAT, or High Court or Supreme Court. Irony is that the matter goes into appeal every time, whether the taxpayer wins or the tax department wins. Because if the taxpayer wins, he would want to take it to the next level, and so is the ambition of the tax department. But we need to have some certainty around it. We need to have some better thresholds. Of course, there are some thresholds to deal with this issue, but the government has to still come up with a practical threshold, so that the benefit of these thresholds can be given to the large corporate houses as well. They are relatively less, and we need to actually address the interpretation issue. Why these tax disputes arise in the first instance itself. We should have very clear interpretation of the tax laws, and whenever there is a situation of two interpretations, there should be clarity coming up from the government at a much early stage than keep on waiting for it. I sincerely hope, and we see much more clarifications in the forthcoming budget, or whenever we have a new tax law, the provisions are more clear to the taxpayers.
Talking about some sticky issues, Gokul, transfer pricing regulations. Now, those have been highlighted as one of the most challenging aspects of the tax landscape. So, in your view, what specific reforms would you recommend aligning these regulations with, say, global best practices while minimizing compliance burdens and litigation? Your thoughts?
So I think the first point I like to make here is that if we look at India, it is becoming far more a part of the global supply chain than ever before. And that's a stated policy that we would like to see ourselves as exporter of goods and services and be a part of the complex supply chain that runs around the world, which effectively means that the number of related party transactions are actually going to grow over the years and not get less in characters in number. The If one was look at the economy today, it's a $3.5 trillion economy. The aspiration is to get to 7 trillion, and a large part of it, but it's going to be by participating on the world stage and the world supply chains. So therefore, when we look at the transfer pricing, which actually deals with related party payments, there are two or three things which are of enormous importance. One is that the government had brought in at a point of time something called safe harbor regulations, which were to say if you transact at a certain type of margins, then of course you will not be subjected to any adverse audits. Now those criterias haven't really been pragmatic enough and competitive enough for them to be adopted whole scale. The question really is, can we get to a more pragmatic set of safe harbor regulations for transfer pricing? Something that the finance minister also has spoken about in parliament. And she has asked for a review and a revamp of these rules. I think if that is done, and if we were to set a practice of saying we would like our safe harbors to be able to cover 90% of all SME transactions to happen in this country or from this country, then I think that's a great start. The second is the government does have an advanced price agreement mechanism. Now, our APA program, as it's called, is certainly a good one. It certainly has yielded result. Over 100 APAs get signed a year. But one of the things that the finance ministry could do is suspend the transfer pricing audits during the period of time when the APA process is underway. So I think there are a number of these measures that can be done.
Taking forward these points around harmonization, let me also see what the impact is of tax uncertainty, especially when it comes to strategic planning and investment decisions for, say, global corporations. So, Sanjeev, your thoughts on this? How does this impact long term planning and investments in India for MNCs when we look at all the uncertainty and all the effort it causes for organizations to comply?
Corporate world always look for complying with the laws, and everyone wants certainty around their tax liability. People would want to discharge their tax liability so long they are sure that this is what they have to pay. And as Gokul mentioned, APA is certainly is one of the best tool so far the government has launched, which actually gives a lot of certainty about your tax liability, and gives you certainty for a reasonable period of time, for at least for 5 years, and it also has a rolling back effect. But the point here is, which concerns a lot of investors, is that it takes a lot of time to conclude. So, the expectation of the industry is, let's keep it little faster, and try to give the certainty to the investors, taxpayers, as early as possible. Secondly, there are, I mean, of course, in the last several years, we have not seen much of the action on the retrospective effect of the taxes. But the point here is, whenever any new law or any new provisions are introduced, uh, the industry expects that at least there should be appropriate consultation, and the draft documents should be published to the public for their opinion. There are experts, tax experts, who can actually give the little better shape of those provisions so that it is effective, and then there are no interpretational issues. situation arises, there should be faster turnaround of uh, those regulations.
From harmonization, let's move to incentivization. So, Sanjeev, incentives, of course, are crucial for fostering innovation and supporting manufacturing. The question to you is, how can India's tax policies be refined to provide clearer and more effective incentives for growth sectors of today and, of course, tomorrow?
The Indian government is actually gradually withdrawing direct tax exemptions or incentives. However, incentives certainly play an important role in the overall economic growth of a developing nation. Now, we have to also understand that whether and deliberate whether these tax incentives can really give some effective investment promotion tool, or how is the how these incentives are taken up by the industry, because there has been a study which says that even if those certain incentives would not be there, the investment would have anyways come into those segments. Industries is certainly looking for certain tax benefits and tax incentives in the R&D segment, because that is where the quality of our goods will improve. That is where the Indian industry will be more competitive in the world, and our exports will boost. So I think we have to see the overall situation about the incentives, and I'm sure the government will continue to support these kind of R&D segment.
All right, Gokul, let me bring you in to tie up any loose ends in this conversation. Now, the Faceless Assessment Scheme, that has been a transformative initiative, yet some challenges do remain. So, your thoughts on the enhancements needed, which are critical to ensure that it delivers greater fairness, transparency, and efficiency. Your thoughts, Gokul?
One of these topics which India has really excelled upon is the adoption of technology. And if you look at the tax systems around the world, a lot of the systems have very legacy processes which are sitting in here. And I think the government of India has demonstrated that we are not just an IT country as far as export of IT is concerned, but we are trying to bring in IT into our tax system to make it more efficient. And I think the Faceless Scheme was one such initiative which the government brought in on a rather progressive basis. And not only brought it on a progressive basis, they have tried to extend upon it to make sure even the appeal processes can become faceless. And I think it's a great move for the government to do it. So I think there are some measures that can be taken, but I think the important thing is that we as taxpayers and as a larger ecosystem of taxes should actually encourage the government on what it's embarked upon, which is a faceless scheme.
Absolutely. And we'll put a pin on that point of digitalization and technology driving the tax ecosystem forward to resolve issues. Meanwhile, it's time to take a short break here on Deloitte Spotlight's Income Tax Policy Survey with CNBC TV18. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Deloitte Spotlight's Income Tax Policy Survey with CNBC TV18. Deloitte Spotlight's Income Tax Policy Survey with CNBC TV18.
Welcome back to our special presentation titled Deloitte Spotlight's Income Tax Policy Survey with CNBC TV18. Sanjeev, coming to you, the Deloitte survey underscores the need for automation and digital tools to streamline processes like tax credits and deductions. Gokul, of course, has mentioned more such points. In your view, how can the adoption of such technologies improve operational efficiency for large multinational companies? What's your prescription?
No, of course, digitization and technology is very important these days. The days are gone when the manual accounting or the manual, bookkeeping would have been of help. For a large organization or for a small organization, the digitization is helping in a big way. So, and especially, in the current scenario when we have numerous sections of TDS, so there are withholding tax obligations under various provisions of law, and it is difficult to comply with all those different sections and different rates to our business transactions unless we have a digital solution. There has to be a digital solution which can take care of these compliance obligations. uh, it is very important.
All right. Gokul, I want you to bring in your inputs to this topic because widening the tax base is going to involve driving trust. And in that aspect, resolving issues, that's where technology plays a key role. Now, businesses have identified dispute resolution as a significant concern, particularly with lengthy litigation processes, as Sanjeev had just mentioned. So, your thoughts on how the government and tax authorities can use technology and policy interventions to expedite these processes and build trust among taxpayers?
The first point is the problem of tax litigation, which is experienced by taxpayers, is equally a challenge for the government. Today, we look at the scale and size of the amounts of tax in dispute is equal to 1 year's tax collection. So that's a significant amount of money that is locked into the system in disputes, whether it's affecting the balance sheets of the taxpayers who have contingent tax liabilities or the government which has these disputed tax happening. And then, of course, the entire judicial system which is burdened with it. So there are a number of stakeholders who are impacted by this. I think we are on the cusp of a technology breakthrough which can actually transform this situation, and that is Gen AI. We are already seeing and various tests that we are doing and pilots that we are doing as Deloitte around the world that it is possible to put the entire database of the preceding judgments and decisions that have taken place in a country in the court system, in the tribunal system, and ask the simple question: here is a tax order. Tell me the predictability of where this matter will go if it's taken to court. And we are seeing that the Gen AI engines are able to respond and say, this particular issue, this order of the tax officer has an 80% chance of success for the tax department or for the taxpayer. Now imagine if the government of India, which is already embarked on digitizing all its court records, all its tribunal records, was to impose the Gen AI engines and layers on it and make sure that we actually push every tax officer order through the Gen AI engines and get an answer which tells the government what is its chance of success based on all the millions of cases that have taken place previously in India. And if it says that the government has less than a 50% chance, then the government could well decide not to litigate that matter. So we can try and bring in not just automation, but Gen AI to help resolve this issue. That's one aspect. We can also use technology on the previous point that you were raising, which is on withholding taxes. Now, one of the things that the government did is they brought in GST. It's transformational to our tax system. And when they brought in GST, and most of the country today, transactions sit in the GSTN, which is a network system on which the GST sits. And that's a robust system, it's a compliant system, it's a data rich system. Imagine if we were to remove withholding taxes from all payments which are subject to GST. Because the fact is that the transaction reporting has already happened and got captured in the GSTN system, which means the government knows who the payer is, who the recipient is, what that's about, and it can ensure that there is a tracking of that transaction. We don't need TDS any longer to be the tracking mechanism. Yes, we do need to ensure that the cash flows of the government, and government runs on the cash basis of accounting, that cash flow is maintained. But believe me, it's a matter of a quarter, because the fact is that advance taxes will get paid according to the basis that there's been no withholding taxes which have been imposed in the system. So therefore, if we were to go for that, TDS will actually only be applying largely on payroll or employee salaries, and not in relation to all the GST based transactions that run domestically in a country. And that would actually be a ease of doing business, a simplification, which would be quite dramatic and quite significant for the taxpayer community.
Let's shift focus now to the sustainability agenda. Sanjeev, Sustainability and ESG compliance are now integral to corporate strategy. So, what role can tax policy reforms play in accelerating the sustainability agenda for MNCs, and how can incentives be designed to encourage environmentally responsible practices across industries?
Rewarding ESG compliant organizations who actually mitigating the environmental impact. I think it could be either in the form of government cash grants, or such projects can be incentivized through tax, to reduce the tax liabilities, to stimulate the investment. So there could be different models around it. Uh, the important thing is that, in some form or the other, such measures should be taken to enhance the reputation and brand value of those organizations who are actually largely complying with the ESG topics. So maybe another way to look at it is that there should be an access to green financing to the companies who are focusing on environmental sustainability programs. There could be employee engagement and tax benefits. So the companies who are able to show that, who are able to demonstrate that yes, ESG strategies are working out well together with their employees. So the such organizations should be recognized, and there could be a shift in that direction.
Indeed. Gokul, let's get your thoughts on this, because with India's evolving economic priorities, how should future tax reforms address emerging industries, digital business models, and of course, sustainability goals, as we mentioned, to align with global trends and attract investments?
So I think, Gautam, if you look at it, India's embarked on a journey for energy transition. And that's a very significant amount of effort that the government of India has embarked on to make sure that instead of fossil fuels, we move on to solar, wind, and other forms of renewables. So one of the aspects which is there is, how do we make sure that these new emerging areas, which is certainly of strategic importance for our sustainability goals to be achieved on a global scale, these get not just the right incentives, and I'm not talking about tax holidays, but how do they get the right incentivization? So I think the important part which is there is that investments is required for the energy transition. It is required for financing our green projects, and I think the government could well do by firstly giving recognition to this activity, and making sure they can understand the nuances of this activity, to make sure taxes don't become a cost to these businesses, and they don't become a block in these businesses, and we are able to move the tax cost, if at all, through the system, so that it doesn't impact the priority on the sector.
Gokul, Sanjeev, thank you so much for joining us and, of course, sharing your insights on the topic. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Till next time, this is your host, Gautam Srinivasan, signing off.
Deloitte Spotlights Income Tax Policy Survey with CNBC-TV18.